Okay.
Yeah. So, where were you both, born? When were you born? If you don't mind me asking, it's yeah.
No, go
In
ahead.
1940, and we were both born in 1940, and I just realized that Dave Koski, he came from Westmont, New Jersey. That's where I came from.
Oh, really?
And I didn't realize that until just recently. So when I run into him, I want to see where he was in Westmont. But are you going to lead on more, or should I?
Yep. And what year was this?
Well, how did we come to Avalon, maybe?
What year were you born though? Just to give the viewers, kind of a sense of, put you in, place.
Right. You were born in 1940.
40, yeah.
40,
And
1940.
my parents had always rented a summer place just for their vacation in Ocean City.
Okay.
And when my dad wanted to buy, he couldn't afford Ocean City. And for some, I don't know how he found out about Avalon, but he bought a building lot on 9th Street across from the little Presbyterian church from Harry Arator. And we came down and cleared the lot and built our own house. We did everything ourselves.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And what did I say about that?
Yeah.
So I
old
was
were you?
12 years old at the
really?
time. It was 1952.
1952. Excellent. How about you, Bernie?
I actually came here when I was 15 years old, back in 1955. And I didn't come here to work at Kohler's Bakery. That's where I started all off. I actually started to work for Mr. Kohler sort of by accident in 1956. I came over as an immigrant from Germany and was introduced to Avalon because I knew Mr. Kohler in February of 1955.
Oh, excellent. How did you make that connection?
Actually, Mr. Kohler started Kohler's Bakery in 1949, and my father worked for him for 2 years. My father was a pastry baker that came over here in 1952.
Okay.
So 3 years later, the family followed him, and here we are, many moons later.
Terrific.
Yeah.
And so, how much time passed between, so you came over when you were 15? When did you two meet in Avalon?
Not until we married and bought the bakery in 1966. But I have
Wait a
impressions.
minute, no. He asked when we met.
Oh, when we met?
Yeah.
Right.
We met in 1957,
1956.
really.
Well, 57, you're right.
We
57.
spied each. I was going to tell that whole story. So.
Oh, by all means.
I wanted to say my impression of Avalon in 1952.
Okay.
Because,
Absolutely.
it was quite different. And I regretted that I had to come with my parents every weekend to build this house. We would bring down building material, and I think must have been day trips back and forth. And Avalon was a desolate place in that time. There were so many vacant lots. And when we finally got a structure up that we could stay in, I remember listening to a buoy out in the inlet. What would you call it? It wasn't a bell buoy. It went woo.
Like
Yeah.
Foghorn?
Remember
yes.
that?
Like
It made that low sound.
Yeah,
Yes,
it
changed.
was spooky. And at that time, the Avalon Hotel was running, and they had a dining room, and you'd hear them all when the windows were open, and it was quite a place until late at night. You could hear the dancing and the singing, and at any rate, that was a strange place. And I had a dog, and I used to go wandering around the sand dunes with my dog, and she would find little rabbit nests in the spring. And it was kind of lonely. I left all my high school friends at home.
Were there many other young people in Avalon during
Not
this time?
at that I didn't know them yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But then my parents allowed me to have a girlfriend stay with me. And we started hanging out at the 23rd Street Public Dock, where there's a
What year
diving
was that?
board. And that was in 1956. And we used to make 3 round trips to town. We'd go down to sit on that dock and back for lunch, and back to the dock and back to 9th Street. And then we would go down in the evening sometimes and go to those teenage dances. But at the dock was where a lot of local kids hung around. And so that's where I first spied him. And there was a group of, there was a boy named Billy Richardson used to sit there. And I don't know whether Frank came to that dock. There were Philadelphia kids.
It was working.
There was a...
Was this Frank Chu?
Frank?
Yeah. Frank is actually Rosemarie's husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And Frank worked at the local hardware store,
Mm-hmm.
which was owned by Jim Whitmire. And so because I had to buy hardware at the hardware store, sometimes Mr. Kohler needed this, needed that. And after a while you begin to talk because we were about the same age, Frank and I. And so he became a friend, and once in a while we took a ride in his 53 Chevy and cruised around town, you know, when you had nothing to do on a rainy day with the wind blowing and so on and so forth. So, and I think Frank got to know Marcia's friend that came down. She invited her, and I think Frank and her, they sort of hung out together after work, that kind of a thing.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So is that where you both met, at the dock that you were talking about?
Well, actually, we saw each other, but we didn't really, he was very bashful. He used to come after work with another boy that worked at the bakery, and they dive off the board and swim and get back in and go home. But, you know, he just caught my eye, had rosy cheeks.
I didn't catch your eye, you caught my eye.
At any rate, then, it must have been in 1957, the next year, there was a little boy that drowned.
Mm-hmm.
He was lost at sea. Do you know the date of that?
Not the exact date, but that was 57?
It was, I think it
Or
must
like
have
It was
been.
either 57 or 56.
Mm-hmm.
It was like towards the last 2 weeks in August.
Okay.
And there was a
uh,
call townwide to everybody come out and help search for him. And I know my father went and walked in a chain of people over the sand dunes and all, and got terrible poison ivy. But Frank brought Bern and this other boy in his car to my house on 9th Street, and that's where we first met. And then we just hung around with a group of young people in Frank's car thereafter.
Well,
And there was the other boys, local kids offshore. There was a boy from Goshen, that his name was Bob Padano, and his parents gave him a beautiful red and white Chevy convertible, a
1957.
convertible.
Very nice.
And we would ride around in that. And then somehow they needed 2 more girls. There were four boys and 2 girls. And we picked up another 2 girls that were summer residents. And we went to the drive-in movie, and we went to Atlantic City and walked on the boardwalk. It was very innocent times. And what else can I say about that?
Well, I think one of the things that are interesting, back in 1950, 55, or in your case in 1952, there weren't too many dedicated lots in Avalon. And they sort of developed during that time. And I worked for Mr. Kohler in 1956 and 1957. And I always had a lot of questions, so I asked him a lot of questions. And I was still in the process of learning English. So if sometimes he said something to the helpers, I had my ears wide open and tried to learn the language. So at any rate, I asked him one night in 57, because he became a commissioner in 1957, commissioner of Avalon. And so he was saying, oh, I gotta hurry up, I gotta go to a meeting. and I knew he was a commissioner. I said, "So what do you do at these meetings?" He says, "Well, we sell lots, building lots." I said, "That's interesting." And I said, "So how much does a building lot go for?" And so he told me, well, somewhere between 400 and maybe 500, and depending on how big they are and where they are specifically, the price would sometimes go up to 600. So I did some quick thinking because I had worked in 1956, and I put my savings account in the First National Bank of Stone Harbor, which was on 21st Street in Avalon. And so I looked at my savings account book, and I had about $425 in that. So I said, "You know something? Why don't you buy me one of those lots?" I was 17
Wow.
years old.
Oh my goodness.
And he says, "Well, okay, I'll try." And off he went to his meeting. So the next morning at 5 o'clock, I started working at the bakery. And so when I was fully awake around 6 o'clock, I said, "Did you ever buy me a lot last night?" He says, "Oh, I meant to tell you. I couldn't buy you a lot because you're only 17 years old. You can only get a lot to be bought by someone else if you're 18 years old." So I was a little bit disappointed, but the sense of business was in the back of my mind.
Yeah. What was Kohler's like back then, as under the original owners?
Mr. Kohler, as I said, he started the bakery in 1949, and it was just a regular, I guess a regular weekend or building that had an upstairs and a downstairs. But the downstairs really was not totally designed for any kind of business, for sure.
May I interrupt and say?
Yes, you may.
Mrs. Kohler told us that the downstairs, and it didn't have very high ceilings down, I don't even think it was 8 feet down there, it was like a dungeon. She said the original people took summer tourists, kind of, and they had made little rooms divided by sheets hanging down for privacy, and had a dirt floor.
Oh my goodness.
And they had also changing rooms outside they built on the side of their garage. So it was very rustic. And so the Kohlers converted that to a business. They cemented the floor and built a shop in the front underneath their front porch. So it was...
Do you know about what year that conversion took place?
That took place in 1949, the year he started it.
Wow.
In fact, his builder was George Gilbert. George Jr.'s, he doesn't work in Avalon anymore as a builder, but he lives offshore now. But George Sr., of course, passed away many years ago. But he was the builder for Mr. Kohler, and he became his buddy, so to speak. And so in 1949, there was just one small triangular area under the porch of the house, enclosed, of course, and there was a door so people can get, and they bought counters and all. And he brought some of that from Philadelphia. He lived I think in Bryn Mawr at the time. And so they worked through 1949, and then through
They lived upstairs and had the bakery downstairs.
Mm.
So,
Actually, most of his winters he spent either in Florida or he would go to Germany to visit his sister.
well, they weren't open in the winter.
They weren't.
They didn't,
It was strictly
didn't have heat.
a summer business.
Okay, just like now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So being young people in Avalon, like today, obviously there's, certain things that Kohler serves that, young people or tourists, they always, they get it on Instagram or whatever. Was there anything in particular that people would buy from Kohler's, or back then was it just bread and cakes and?
It was Philadelphia sticky buns like now, not so many donuts, I don't think.
Right, the sticky buns was the big item.
Breakfast pastries and stuff.
Yeah. And then he used to make crumb buns and small fruit-filled Danish, and he created what he would call a stone, which is a German type of baked good, but it wasn't quite the same as in Germany. It was a lot richer and also sweeter. And so aside of that, he did bread and rolls. But that wasn't the big item.
It's always been a breakfast kind of a place. People would come from church and line up and come for their breakfast.
Most of the people that came down here, they came from Philadelphia. And in fact, it was at one point, there were a lot of Irish people down here this summer. So a lot of people called it the Irish Riviera. I don't know whether you ever heard that name.
I have not.
Oh yeah, a lot of elderly people, you're going down to the Irish Riviera, meaning Avalon.
Oh wow.
Okay, and so we were very busy as soon as the first Mass came out, which I believe was around 8, and then there was another Mass and they came out at 10. There may have been one at 9, but that was the major part of the business. And then in progressive years, they changed, the church changed that you could now have Mass on Saturday. So Saturdays got a little busier, Sunday was still very busy.
Excellent. And what year did you take over? What year did you buy Kohler's?
What year? I bought the bakery in 1966. So I had the 1960 season, and I had it for 25 years. So, and after the 1991 season, I sold it.
Wow, it's a long time.
Yeah.
And you both worked in the shop?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
We raised our children there. But I thought perhaps you wanted to know about early Avalon.
Oh yes,
You
oh, yes,
invited us
absolutely.
here.
I'm sorry,
So
I'm kind of ahead.
a lot's
No,
been
yeah.
written already about the bakery.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to say, when I first came here, and I don't know what year it happened, that none of the streets were cut through to the beach. None of the beach block. It ended on Avalon Avenue. And so that was all wild terrain back there. And there were pilings left from when a boardwalk ran all the way down to the end of the island. So that there was remnants of the 1800s. And at that time, you went through a little path through the dunes to get down on the beach. And you could walk the beach all the way around the point and under the Townsend's Inlet Bridge, all the way to the yacht club. There was a beach. And
That has changed.
And then the 62 storm came and it wiped off the whole point of the island and eroded all that area. But it was quite a different place. And around 1954, my parents bought a little wooden boat, a secondhand boat, and brought it down from Westmont. And we went exploring in the back bays, and that was when all these little fishing shacks were still standing back in the marshes.
Yeah, they had those like little wooden platforms going around.
They must have used them for hunting or fishing or something. They were all, wrecks at that time, with no glass in the windows or anything. But I remember all those little shacks back in the marshes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, raising your family. What was it like being a kid in Avalon, in the 50s versus raising a family, in the 60s and 70s?
Well, there were still young families here, and our children had children to play with. They walked to the Avalon school. And I also thought of another memory. I used to take them picking blackberries. We used to go with both of our children and find blackberries on the vacant lots.
Oh.
So.
Well, actually, the kids enjoyed going down towards the beach. We lived on 27th Street, the same place where the bakery is, just 2 houses towards the beach from there. And we would go down to the beach, and because the road in the early 60s there wasn't really a street going from First Avenue, Avalon Avenue to the ocean. Okay, and so there were a lot of wild land, and some of them were they had the outlines of a lot, and most of them didn't. And so they would go berry picking, blackberries right on the street, more or less. And that's sort of an unusual thing
Yeah.
when you think about it. And that's only, 60, that's 30, that's 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
That's amazing. When you look at the town these days,
And
what
it was
a
like,
drastic change.
no one ever heard of Avalon. It was the end of the world down here. And who would think what's happened to Avalon?
The Irish Riviera came through.
I don't know.
Yeah. Did you all feel more cut off? Because, you know, I guess the road into Avalon was relatively new back then.
Yes.
And
No,
so,
well, back then we had the swing bridge.
Right, you came down on 21st Street.
yeah, that's right.
And I think they built the big bridge in about 1970 or 72.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm not sure exactly what year. But, well, it was a different way to get into Avalon. A little bit less crowded when you come down on a Memorial Day weekend for the first time.
You
Oh, yeah.
don't have to
Most
wait
people
for a
did.
bridge to.
Yeah.
But we were talking to Carol Hart. She found out you were doing that. And, she said that it's soon to be the 60th anniversary of the 62 storm.
Yes, it is. Next year.
Yeah.
Next year.
And the Kohlers, they had water in their building up to, waist high in there. And Mrs. Kohler said all their cabinets that held the baked goods were floating around and all the glass broke.
Oh, wow.
And when we bought the bakery in 62, and you'd have
66.
66, and we had a humid day, you could see the salt line on the wallboard. The
Wow.
salt was still there and it would absorb the moisture, so you could see what the water level was. And I remembered that I may very well have an 8mm movie film of coming into Avalon when they first let people return to the island.
Oh, wow.
And I remember weaving in and out of all the little houses that were displaced along the 21st Street Causeway. And there's a picture with a boat sitting on a Phillips Exxon station on the corner. And
Do either of you have any particular memories of the 62 storm while we're on the subject?
we weren't living on the island then.
We came here in 66 to live here.
You were in the Air Force, or you had
Yeah,
just gotten out.
I had just gotten out of the military, right?
And my parents it was a summer home, that they just came on weekends.
Oh.
But when we finally came in, 9th Street, where their house was high enough that it didn't flood at all. They were one of the few streets, I don't think, that ever had water on it. So.
Well, that section, that northern part of Avalon, between 2nd Avenue, First Avenue and 2nd Avenue, it seems like it was always the highest spot around
Yeah.
9th Street,
Well,
10th Street, and where the Avalon Hotel was.
In the historical records, there had been a very high sand dune around there. That's how
Yeah.
that cedar tree got exposed by
right.
Penrose's.
Right.
And when they
Bob can
leveled
tell you
it,
about
when they
that.
leveled the island, when they took down all the dunes and filled in the low
Right.
spots, they must have left a little extra sand there by that sand dune. That's what I'm thinking. So.
It's interesting when you think about it. All that, what we now call the ocean lots and the ocean streets, or anything beyond Avalon Avenue, that's all been man-made,
Oh, yeah.
and also, of course, on Ocean Drive.
Well, yeah, Ocean Drive, they filled that.
Yeah,
and that was
but
all
I'm talking
swampy.
about the east side of Dune Drive. That's all. I guess it come down to it, most of it in Avalon was man-made. Everybody pushed sand in this direction and that direction and made it come out with lots and so on and so forth.
Well, they did it by hand with wheelbarrows and shovels. They just.
Well, they had steam shovels.
No, they didn't.
They didn't?
The horses and manual labor.
Oh.
It's in the book.
Oh, the elephants.
No
Didn't they?
elephants.
They didn't have elephants?
No, a horse. Moved the Avalon Hotel was not an elephant.
They only came across the Alps, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so, I mean, given that you ran, Kohler's, for, 30 odd years,
25 years to be
25
exact.
years, okay.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, talk about, how the development happened, the movement of the Irish Riviera. Did you notice a change in clientele and, people living
Oh,
here
yeah.
over the
Sure.
25 years?
Yeah, we did. I used to always think that when somebody came to the bakery and they bought baked goods, it was a matter of, oh, I'll have a half a dozen of those, have a dozen of those, and I'll take another dozen of that over there. And then we put signs on it, they knew the names. And then we knew when Labor Day was around, or the last week of the last week of August and the beginning of September, because it wasn't always the same date. And we had a lot of always New Yorkers the last week of the summer. And New Yorkers would come in the store and say, oh, is that fresh? And well, yes, it is. It was baked this morning. Can I have one of those and two of those? And it was not
They didn't
like,
trust.
like the Philadelphia baker or customer. I'll take a dozen of these and a half a dozen of that. And they were very, very. They didn't trust you, more or less. That may have been the New York City climate, and I remember part of that when I used to live in New York City. So it was nothing unusual, except they had the New York accent.
Well, Kohler's Bakery has a lot of faithful, long-time customers. And it's like we're on the third
Yeah.
generation.
Oh,
That we sold. Ben bought the business from the Kohlers. We sold it to young people that had worked for us as teenagers, and they in turn sold it to at least one more person that worked for them as teenagers.
And was a cousin.
So, yeah, and the cousins. So we've tried to keep it the same for all these years. And like he'll tell you, we think it's the oldest surviving business in Avalon. It's not the original building, but it's the same business with some of the same clientele and the same products.
And most of the same recipes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just about all of them, actually. They may have
It's
added a
very,
couple
very
things.
hard work because you're not just selling a product, you have to make it. And it's made from scratch. So, and then you have all the washing up to do, and it just is a labor of love, I guess.
Kohler's Bakery is probably one of the few scratch bakeries in this country, and it's only a summer business.
Oh, wow.
As most of the bakeries in this country now are no longer scratch bakeries. In other words, the baker looks at a recipe, okay, that's what I'm going to do. It's all prepared.
They buy mixes.
And all you have to do mostly is add fat and water and yeast, and then you mix it at a certain temperature and so on. That's what most bakeries do today. And I think in this country, I was reading only about 27% are scratch bakeries. It's sort of a funny statistics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those are the kind that stick out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do either of you have favorite memories of stories, either of old Avalon or, running Kohlers?
Well, we were there for 25 years, like I say, and we start out with teenagers that are only like 14, 15 years old. So we watch so many young people grow up, and they're almost like adding to your family, We still are in touch with so many of the ones, and Carol Hart is one of them. And so we used to have a lot of fun and attend their weddings, and they included us in their families, and so that's a happy memory. We have one crazy guy that calls us in from California, he lived with us for a couple of summers, and he made us laugh all the time, and he became a teacher. So he calls in every once in a while, and so it's just, we have one boy that lived down the street from us, and he was left at the summer home on his own when he was only 15. How old was Jim?
Jim, I think he was about 15. Yeah.
And his mother was so worried about leaving her child at home alone. But we ended up, she used to cooking meals and put them in the freezer so he wouldn't starve to death. But we kind of took him in. So he worked with us his whole student life. In fact, he had to register at Penn State around Labor Day, and we needed him to work. So he had a private pilot's license, and he flew this boy out. He hopped out of the plane, went and registered for classes, got back in the plane, and came back home to Avalon.
Ready to work on Labor Day.
Wow.
The next morning.
That's incredible.
We have a lot of
unique little
like
stories,
that.
you know.
And this boy went on to work in Washington. Do you remember? He was a comptroller, and he worked at the Capitol
on the Hill.
building.
Oh, wow.
And he raised his family and retired. And then he took us on a tour, a VIP tour of the Washington Capitol, up into the dome and all kinds of.
Very nice.
So, you know, we just.
And I still talk to him today and his
Yeah.
family.
Excellent.
And I know all his kids and grandkids. We went to his weddings. You know, it's really a great way that you keep together and learn about other families, and everybody has a very unique individual respect for one another.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the important thing.
Families used to come and stay for the summer or long term, and it was easier to have young people work for you, or there were local children. But that's gotten to be really hard. There's no inexpensive place for kids to rent a room to stay for the summer, and I don't know how you get enough enough staff to run your business anymore. They're all 1 and 2 week rentals, and not so many families anymore. That's a big difference.
Not too many 2-week rentals today.
Yeah.
They're all 1 week and for the whole season, it seems.
There used to be the Holiday Hotel on 21st Street, and they rented rooms. You had somebody bake for us. A baker stayed in that building, but I don't know. You couldn't hire someone off the island to come in and work. They wouldn't have any place to live unless you put them up. So.
And you said this boy, Jim, that worked here, so he was 15 when he started with you?
I started, you mean when we started working?
When the boy who was
Jim Cornell?
Oh, Jim
Yeah.
Cornell, yeah, 15. We had several young kids that
Yeah.
started at 15, and it depends where they worked, whether they worked producing material or just selling. Because in the bakery, you have a lot of heavy equipment. You have some big mixers that if you were to get your arm into one of them, you come out with no arm. And that's the kind of danger we always had to be cognizant of, because
it's restricted.
you also weren't allowed by the Board of Health to do that. So these kids used to do things where they are not near heavy equipment.
They used to stay to the bitter end, too. They were very diligent about working until Labor Day. And I remember one girl, and that would have been Ann Harmon. She was still in her red bakery apron, and the parents were leaving to go to Baltimore, and she ran out of the store and hopped in the car and went home after the whole summer. And now kids will take off because they need a break before they start school, and it's really hard to get them to stay till Labor Day.
You know, back in the 60s, that used to be the mantra, really. The season was over on Labor Day, and by 1 o'clock, there was a beeline out of Avalon.
The town would empty.
Nothing even like what you see today. Everybody was leaving.
You could hear the crickets chirping on Monday afternoon of
Yeah,
Labor
exactly.
Day. And not
Exactly.
anymore.
All of a sudden, that noise disappeared. That is composed of all the traffic, people talking on the street, trucks coming down. After Labor, the first day after Labor Day, it disappeared, and you could hear the crickets. Yes, not
Yeah.
today.
And
Yeah.
to track back about when my parents had that little 13-foot outboard boat, they kept it at Harvey's Harbor, and you probably know about that. And that was, I lived on 9th Street, and I could walk across the athletic field, it was just a vacant field, and go to the boat dock and take our boat out. And on that athletic field, the circus used to come to town. And we'd have all the circus people, they'd put their tents up and then they'd go down the street and go to the beach. So we saw all kinds of strange type people on 9th Street in the summer sometimes. That was a little different.
Oh my goodness, all that.
And 9th Street was also fairly influenced by the bongo room.
Oh yeah, then the
You know,
bongo room.
You close at 2:30. I think it was 2:30 when the bars closed, and then you have all the drunks come out. "Hey!"
But you didn't live there.
I didn't live there,
I
I
did.
know.
My parents, they didn't care for that too much.
Yeah,
was it?
yeah.
They were
But
always
you know, every place has its uniqueness, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. So were you year-round residents by the time you moved here in the 60s?
Yes, yes.
Nice.
Our kids grew up here, went to Avalon School,
Yeah.
and then they went to Middle Township High School, and now they live. Actually, my son lives back in CL City, and
Oh.
my daughter lives in, where is she?
Wallingford, Pennsylvania.
Wallingford, Pennsylvania.
But they bring their kids down in the summer.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why I want very much to keep the little tiny cottage that we have. I don't want to sell it and tear it down, because then our children that were born and raised here, they couldn't afford to come back into Avalon. So
Well, who
I'm like a
knows?
squatter on 27th Street.
Who knows? Maybe they'll win the lottery and buy a bigger place
Yeah. So I
because
guess-
they have enough children.
But that's the big difference, you know, all those years ago, Avalon was affordable to ordinary working people.
Not now.
And now it's like a different world here, it's very strange.
So did having kids, was that enough to keep you busy in the off season, or, you know?
We closed, most of the time we closed after the second week, no, the last weekend in September.
Now, wait a minute, I want to edit
Was that
that.
the question?
Well, it's just, you know, so it's
I think
quiet.
you
No.
said if we
Did
have
we-
business or,
Well, not so much the business, but as, you know, people living in Avalon in the off season, you know.
No,
it's-
once the
Okay.
tourists went home, we didn't have so much business, but Carol Hart reminded us that in the early times, when we first had it, we were poor. We didn't have enough money to make our mortgage payment. So after Labor Day, we'd make our mortgage payment, and then anything we earned after that was ours. And we used to keep open weekends till Thanksgiving, and then we would close, and we reopened at Christmas time with fruitcakes and Christmas cookies. And we used to open in the spring at Easter time. So we had a very long season, but he went on to become a teacher, because a summer business is not enough to support a family. So he was a high school teacher then at Lower Cape May, and he used to work 7 days a week when we had the business still open, and then he,
once
Yeah.
Easter came, yes.
yeah. So we were kind of scratching the bottom for a lot of years. But as the other owners progress, they really, their lives are up in the Philadelphia area, and they have other jobs up there. So once school starts, they close up and go home.
Were a lot of,
We lived here, and so we have a longer.
okay. Were you hard pressed for like things to do in the off season? You know, did most places close like they do now at the end of
Yes.
season?
Yes.
Well,
It,
it was
Yeah.
longer to go grocery shopping and stuff, but hard pressed, we
well,
lived a
basically,
normal family life. So
basically, when you come down to it, even then, there weren't enough businesses open to keep somebody going. There used to be a place, Sam's Market, on 30.
Oh, that's what I wanted to say too. I remember shopping at Sam's in the Pioneer Market.
And
But
even,
that was all before we lived here. That
right,
was-
and that even, Sam's even, well, they were open for a while, but I think they went away for a month or something like that. But there weren't too many businesses open here.
So when we lived here, I mean, we had King's Pharmacy, we had the Avalon hardware store, and we had to go offshore to buy groceries. You couldn't
Right.
buy milk. If you ran
That's
out of
right,
milk,
you could, I think
there
that's.
was no Wawa or
Yeah.
anything, but it was a normal place. There were school activities and
Yeah, and the kids always said, "Oh my God, I can't wait to leave Avalon."
and then they come back.
You know, they got to their senior year in high school. Oh man, it'd be great to go away from Avalon in the winter. And now, you know,
I think they
everything
enjoyed-
changes. Your
They
outlooks
enjoyed
change.
growing up here. They did skateboarding and they had groups of friends, yes?
That's one thing they did.
they
Skateboarding.
had- they
I
had-
was cutting for the next thing.
When they got to be 15, they both had mopeds they were riding around on. So,
Yeah.
But the kid, wasn't much to get them in trouble here on an island. It was pretty good.
The police knew everybody.
That's always handy.
It is. It is. Absolutely. So, at any rate.
So what's the next step at this stage in your lives? You know, so you guys are going to Vermont, or you've been in Vermont for a while now?
We have lived in Vermont now for 23 years.
When he retired from teaching, we made that our residence.
Yeah, I retired about 23 years ago now.
Oh wow.
And we have moved. We actually built our own house in Vermont. So that's when we moved into the house roughly. And we like it up there.
But we go back and forth constantly.
Yeah.
3 weeks here, 3 weeks there. And,
Not in the winter.
no, after Thanksgiving is our cutoff because we don't have a year-round home.
Okay.
So we drain the water and disappear until spring.
Instead of going to Philadelphia, as most people do here, you know, summer down here in Avalon, winter, summer, back and forth all winter, all year long. We go to Vermont.
But once we're up
And
there, then we
come
don't
back down
see our
here.
children or our grandchildren unless they come up to ski. So that's why we come down here.
Oh, very good. So do y'all have any other favorite stories or memories of your lives in Avalon? Either really early 50s, or 60s.
Well,
You are the longer.
I just remember how wild and open it was, and I walked on those sidewalks that were the yellow bricks from the original people that developed it, and in fact I still have some of those bricks. And I just remember how quiet it was. And I
Oh, yeah.
remember the streets before they paved them all the way to the curb. It was sandy on the sides.
And they didn't have any lights on the streets.
No, that's right. That's another thing.
I mean, you compare that today, it's like a big city. But during those days, oh man.
Oh, I've never seen this mentioned. When my parents were coming down, like, on making day trips to work on their house, and we come over the last bridge, and at the corner of 3rd Avenue and 21st Street, there was a little restaurant, and it was called the Blinker, because the light there wasn't a stoplight, it was just a blinking light.
Really?
And we used to get baskets of fried chicken and French fries and stuff. And that fed us because we didn't have a kitchen to cook in. We went to the Blinker restaurant.
The Blinker restaurant, I remember it.
Oh wow.
Corner of Ocean Drive and 21st Street. And I remember when I came from New York City on the bus, we drove down
Yeah,
from...
there's your story.
I beg your pardon?
Oh, I thought you were going to say your first impression of Avalon.
Oh,
coming
yeah,
on the
well,
bus.
that's what you get. So, the bus stopped in Atlantic City, and it was on its way to Cape May. So it would stop in a couple places, Ventnor, Apseek, and da-da-da-da, and then come to Ocean City, then to Strathmere, Sea Isle City, and the Townsend Inlet Bridge. And, you know, I'm going through all these bridges of Ocean Drive, starting in Ocean
Can I just
City.
interrupt you a minute?
Yes, you can.
This is a 15-year-old boy that didn't speak much English and coming from New York City.
Right,
So,
exactly.
That's good
So
context.
continue.
Never having been at the seashore area.
no.
And this was in May of May? No. It was in November of 1955, late November. And so, you know, November in Avalon is nowhere.
Not in
Now, in
1955.
1955, it was definitely nowhere. And so the bus is going up the bridge in Sea Isle and coming to the other side of the Townsend, coming on the other side of Avalon. And you know how you see those Western movies sometimes where the tumbleweed goes across the highway? Well, here was the tumbleweed going across the highways. I was saying, where in the heck are you? And so I finally got down to the blinker, and the blinker was blinking, and I had no idea where the Kohlers were, because I had met them in Germany, not in the US. So I decided, well, I'm going to walk down. Bus stopped at the blinker, and I decided, well, going this way, I'm going to swim in the bay. Going that way, there are some houses, and that's where I'm going to go. So I walked from Ocean Drive to Dune Drive. And then I took a right, and I decided, I better find out where I am. So the liquor store was open. Good old liquor store, right? How can you have a town where
That
there's
was open
nothing?
and
You
you
gotta
went.
have a liquor store. So I went inside and I said, could you please tell me where Kohler's Bakery is? And the guy looked at me and he says, yeah, okay, Kohler's Bakery. And it was, I forget his name. The Gallaghers owned it,
Okay.
and he married one of the Gallagher girls. At any rate, so he says, well, come here, I'll show you. He says, come on to the door, and he realized that I didn't speak much English. So he says, so go from here, take a right after this door, and go all the way down. This is 21st Street over here, 22nd Street. And that will be 27th Street. And you'll see the sign, Kohler's Bakery. And that's where you go. Well, I walked down there, and desolate. Nobody on the street. This was about 9 o'clock in the evening. And so I walked in the back door, and there was a light. I walked towards the light, and they were the Kohlers having a dinner, late dinner. Oh, Bern, how are you? And Avalon had a memory of a desolate town in the Midwest for me. All I was waiting for was the gunslinger, but they didn't show up, luckily.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Kohler spoke German?
Mr. Kohler came from Germany.
Okay.
Mrs. Kohler didn't speak many words of German, just like Marcia does.
Yeah, I never learned German.
And but Mr. Kohler and I, we could converse in German.
Okay.
And
Were there many other German speakers on
no,
the island then?
no, he was the only one I remember. Oh, actually, I'll take that back. The owner of the Eagle Cafe down there.
The Black Eagle?
Eagle.
Black Eagle,
Mhm.
yes.
The Dirty Bird.
Yes.
I forget his name. At any rate, he was a German.
Okay.
He spoke German.
Oh,
But Mr. Kohler married a girl from Philadelphia, and her family had a property in Avalon. And that's how they came down to Avalon. They had a little tiny house near where the Catholic Church is. It was back in the Phragmites, back in
The
the...
Maristella.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Mrs. Cole, they had a business in what did you say, Bryn Mawr? Ice
think it
cream
was Bryn
business
Mawr.
or something. And Mrs. Kohler said, why don't you start a bakery? And I don't think Mr. Kohler he was not a baker by trade. He had been trained to be a manservant.
He actually was an immigrant from Argentina to here.
He went to Germany, to Argentina, but he was trying to immigrate, but there was no quota for Germans at the time, but he was told he could go to South America. So he was a butler, that's the word. He learned to be a butler to a wealthy family. And then when he was able, I guess, he came from Argentina to
the United States. The goal was he wanted to come to the United States when he was a young person. And then everybody in Germany realized, God, it's about a 3-year wait to get an immigration visa. And so, you learn through the grapevine, and he learned if you go to Argentina, you can get to the United States in about a year and a half. So he decided, well, I'm going to go to Argentina. And he learned the language, or at least enough to get by. He became a butler. And he told his boss, he says, well, I do intend to go to the United States. And he did a good job, obviously. And his boss recommended him to have a job in the United States as a butler. So he did that for a short while. And then he became a baker. I think he started out on Long Island.
Oh, wow.
And somehow merged to Philadelphia area. So.
And we're going to spend some time tomorrow with his granddaughter.
Oh,
That's
fantastic.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So just that whole connection that you guys were mentioning of just, these connections that pass generation to generation, that's fantastic.
Yeah. In fact, through his granddaughter, we have met a lot of the family that is in Germany, but it's 2 generations hence, that kind of a thing. It's interesting.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.